This is chapter 2, part 2. We left off last time talking about how it looks like some serial killers from a long time ago, from centuries ago, existed, and that their crimes were sort of turned into legends of such things as werewolves, vampires, that kind of thing, so that there was this sort of magical element that was added to a reality of these disturbed criminal types. So let's turn the topic a little bit to something related. Again, what Hickey, the author of the textbook, is doing here in chapter 2 is focusing on cultural things, which might have some influence on serial killers. I think, let me say that I think that, again, this is a little bit of opinion here, but I think that the causes of serial murder are tend to be more psychological and situated in the brain, and that we'll cover some of these issues in other chapters, and that this cultural stuff is probably less crucial to the origins of serial killers because you don't really have that many cultural elements that are pushing people towards these sorts of sensational crimes. I mean, if you're talking about gang crime, that's something that makes sense to explain from sort of at least a subcultural point of view, where you have a group that has sort of deviant beliefs, pro-criminal, counter-cultural beliefs that encourage people to do criminal things that they wouldn't otherwise do. But you don't really have clear, obvious, important cultural things that are creating serial killers. I think it makes more sense, as we saw with werewolves, vampires, that these people who are mentally disturbed people may draw upon certain cultural elements to influence the way that their mental illness is manifested, that they have these delusional beliefs that they're a werewolf, or that they're a vampire, or that, that sort of thing. But I think that culture probably tends to work that way, that it leads disturb people to adopt certain practices or beliefs. So let's switch over and talk about satanic and cult beliefs for a moment. Modern day serial killers, at least some, not, you don't see it all the time, but once in a while you'll see serial killers who adopt satanic and cult beliefs and practices. And what we mean by a cult is this is a religious group that typically isolates itself from the rest of society, that it espouses or embraces extreme, very countercultural kinds of beliefs that run very contrary, perhaps the opposite of mainstream culture, and that these groups tend to be started and run by very charismatic personalities, controlling people who are able to captivate vulnerable individuals and, exert a lot of control over the beliefs and the behaviors of these vulnerable followers. So charismatic leaders, vulnerable followers, and a lot of the control and influence is facilitated by removing people from their friends, their families, their various types of social supports, isolating them someplace, and then working to influence, convince them to have extreme beliefs. Sometimes there could be drugs involved that could facilitate the, convincing these people of extreme um, kinds of beliefs, potentially violent kinds of beliefs. By the occult, we mean beliefs and practices that are mysterious, supernatural, magical, and kept secret. So, what you sometimes see with serial killer types is that an attraction to these occult beliefs and practices, to satanic ideas, satanic images, and that sort of thing. So it's I don't think it's so much that these beliefs are causing people to become serial killers, but it may be imagery, beliefs, and practices that disturbed people are attracted to. But it's also possible that if you have a very controlling cult-like situation, that could convince people to commit crimes and even murder that they wouldn't otherwise do, but not so much create a serial killer, a long-time killer um, who kind of does things more independently and doesn't need some group controlling them to kill people repeatedly. So Anton LaVey founded the Church of Satan on the witches' feast day of Walpurgis Night on April 30th, 1966. The membership is reportedly about 20,000. Now, again, this could fluctuate, and it's not so important the exact number here, but you do have some of these different various groups, and not just this one in the United States that have sort of practice and have satanic sorts of uh, beliefs. And again, what Hickey's doing is sort of looking at how these beliefs, images, ideas, practices could be attractive to some disturbed individuals. According to LaVey's Satanic Bible, members worship the Trinity of the devil, Lucifer, Satan, and the devil. Um, Satan represents the opposite of Christian values. And again, this is drawn from the textbook. Number one, indulgence as opposed to self-control, meaning enjoying yourself if indulging in various desires or unacceptable desires. Um, Number two, an earthly rather than a spiritual existence. So a focus on the kind of the material, the down to earth, this world as opposed to a spiritual world or an otherworldliness. Three, wisdom instead of self-deception. So this idea that sort of focusing on the earth and our material, physical lives is more of kind of a sensible, wise approach than focusing on spiritual, supernatural forces, which this view, the satanic view, would be would consider to be a self-deception, that fooling oneself about things that aren't the case, that aren't true. And number four, kindness to those who deserve it, but not universal kindness. It's sort of more of a quid pro quo situation where if you treat me well, I treat you well, but if you treat me poorly, then I'll treat you poorly. So, you know, less of a forgive everybody sort of thing and more uh, treat people according to what they deserve. Five is so it's an openness to vengeance. So part of that would be is if you have people who hurt you, then it's okay, perfectly appropriate to hit back or to hurt back. A vengeance. So again, tit for tat, kind of a ethics. Number six, responsibility, meaning that you take control of your life and that you have free will to do as you please and that you're responsible for your actions. And number seven, that sees humans as animals. So it takes this biological, evolutionary view of humans, that we're just one more species of animals and not something that's apart from nature, but that we're part of nature. And also eight, embracing physical gratification. So it goes along with number one, indulgence, that in the traditional religions, say for example Christianity, there's a lot of emphasis on self-control and not giving into temptations and control when it comes to physical gratification, whether that be sex or other sorts of pleasurable things. Um, that traditional religions tend to expect restraint on these things, and whereas the satanic view is to enjoy pleasures and physical gratification. And then number nine is that this idea is that you see a lot of these values here and beliefs are sort of in contrast or perhaps the opposite of traditional Christian beliefs. And so the idea that this belief system is in competition with Christianity. And of course, you can see how it's set up to be the opposite of, because Christianity advocates worshiping God, believing in worshiping God. And so this view is like the opposite, that you don't worship God, you worship Satan. And so you can see how it's sort of, you know, embraces a lot of the opposite views on things. The church has rituals and spells which supposedly help members reach their potential. The church mirrors the rituals and organizations of Christians with a priesthood, mass, holidays, etc. So again, think mirror image, that you take what Christianity does and you kind of flip it over and do have something that looks similar, that may have certain similar practices like masses or holidays or a priesthood priest, but it's the opposite, in other respects, worshiping Satan and sort of valuing some of the opposite sorts of things from traditional religion. Their invocations and incantations take the place of prayer. So again, these are all sort of substitutes uh, for the traditional way of doing things. And there are some writings that approve of human and animal sacrifice in certain circumstances, although what I've generally seen is that a disapproval of this sort of thing by people who practice this, a disapproval of animal or human sacrifice. But you do see, some indications, some writings that are more positive towards this sort of thing. And certainly, if you look at sort of, pre-Christian religions, you look at pagan religions, that animal sacrifice or even human sacrifice is something you often see part of many traditional ancient religions have this notion of sacrifice of animals or even humans. So it's certainly something that's not foreign to ancient religious beliefs. But anyway, so voodoo, this is the use or belief of religious witchcraft. Spells are cast in order to get vengeance and protection against others. Voodoo is very ancient. So again, these are a lot of these beliefs and practices have roots in that are ancient, that go way back, that may be pre-Christian or other world religions like Islam and Judaism, that kind of thing. They're ancient ideas that have been around and existed perhaps before these world religions came into existence. And so you sometimes see some, again, it's not something that I think that Hickey might sort of emphasize too much, how much you see this among serial killers. It's just occasionally you'll see serial killers who take an interest in these sorts of more ancient beliefs or forms of worship and the imagery that goes along with them. In the late 1980s, you had a voodoo cult in Matamoros, Mexico, that was heavily involved in drug smuggling and was believed to have killed 15 to 20 victims. So you'll sometimes see these cult murders or groups that have these sort of non-traditional, non-mainstream belief systems and value systems who will, have members kill people for various reasons. It could be, in this case, related to the drug business, to drug smuggling, or other sorts of things. It could be kind of a cult, religious sort of movement, that kind of thing. They believed that through certain forms of witchcraft and human sacrifice, they could gain protection from police, bullets, and other threats of the drug trade. So it's drawing upon some of these ancient beliefs and practices so as to get certain things from it. In this case, protection from law enforcement, that kind of thing. By cutting out and burning the brains of the victims and mixing this with blood, herbs, and certain animal parts, that they could commit their crimes with total success. So again, it's just a belief that if you do certain rituals or follow certain religious practices, that you can gain protection or positive feelings, positive treatment by divine forces, by, supernatural forces. A small percentage, less than 5% of serial killers have been involved in the occult, or at least claim to. So this is an important part of this chapter, is to say that this stuff generally is not relevant, but 5%, less than 5%. Occasionally, you see some of these serial killers who have connections with occult sorts of beliefs and practices, satanic beliefs and practices, or other, cult-related groups, voodoo, that kind of all these things that we've been talking about. Again, because what we're doing in this chapter is we're kind of laying out the role that culture could play in all of this. So examples we have here, a couple of examples. Donald Harvey, who killed 58 people in different hospitals, that had some attraction to some of these occult beliefs, had satanic books in his possession. Richard Ramirez, California serial killer inscribed satanic symbols in the homes of his victims. Uh, and I believe he had some tattoos and that kind of thing. Henry Lucas, who killed hitchhikers in the South, claimed to worship Satan. So some of this is clearly tied up with different forms of mental illness. That there could be that people who suffer from various forms of mental illness may be attracted to unusual beliefs and practices, things that are non-mainstream, that are sort of exotic, that whatever their appeal is, that you do sometimes see this. But again, uh, it, it's not necessarily that any of these beliefs or practices led them to commit their crimes, but rather they're disturbed people who, along with being violent and killing people, uh, might be also attracted to some dark things, to some strange, unusual, non-mainstream sorts of symbols, beliefs, etc. And that could be the extent of it. In some cases, serial killers might be attracted to satanic symbols since they mark the dark nature of their criminal desires. So again, there's a lot of sort of darkness there. There's this, some of it could be perceived as being pro-violent, or it's not always clear exactly what the attraction is, but sometimes you do see that. In other cases, they might use these symbols to sensationalize their stories. Perhaps law enforcement and the media tend to exaggerate the role of Satanism in their violence. Because again, it does add some color. This aspect, these symbols, beliefs, do add to the sort of colorfulness, the fact that these cases are fascinating. They're made more fascinating by any of these connections to the occult or strange, dark symbology and beliefs and practices, that kind of thing. So it could be that this is sometimes exaggerated or focused on, because one thing you should pay attention to throughout this entire course is that a lot of the research that we discuss in this course is sort of journalistic, or even if it's harder research, it tends to be I think there's a tendency to researchers to go into these cases and to see what they want to see, to pick and choose elements that they find interesting, that they find compelling, that they think are clues that point towards an explanation for what turns somebody into a serial killer. So it, to some extent, it could be that people are sort of hand picking certain things that they find compelling, and they may or may not be. And such is the case with things of these satanic symbols, etc. At the same time, beliefs in favor of human sacrifice might encourage violence. So again, you might have somebody who's disturbed, who is attracted to any sort of strange beliefs that might encourage or facilitate or be favorable towards human sacrifice. So really, this chapter, out of all these chapters, definitely this semester, is sort of short and only makes some narrow, specific points, which again are so. Another way of saying it is that chapter 2 is definitely not the most important. I think in terms of understanding and explaining serial killers, I think it's one of the more minor chapters. So I think we'll leave it there. That pretty much covers what I want to cover.